Curiosities. Thank you for listening. Today we're going to be talking about Nazi Hunters by Neil Bascom, about how a team of spies and survivors captured the world's most notorious Nazi. I'm Alex Flynn.
I'm Vanessa Moreno.
I'm Sophia Alonso.
And for a more in-depth summary.
So basically, Nazi Hunters is a novel about how the world reacted to the Holocaust and how a team of survivors and special agents were capturing the most notorious Nazi who isn't really talked about in history books. So Adolf Eichmann, he is known as the most notorious Nazi. He escaped after World War II, after the war was over and Germany had surrendered and all the other officials had escaped or committed suicide like Hitler. He escaped to Argentina, and he wasn't known about for the next 15 years. And Israel, after a while, decided to come up with a team of volunteers that wanted to capture him for personal reasons and just in general to get justice for those 6 million people he actually was part of killing. And they did it, and this is our reactions to the book.
So I'll go ahead and go first. I really liked this book. I genuinely there were parts where I didn't want to put it down, and I really liked. There are parts where they detail the plan to capture him and how drawn out that was. That was one of my favorite parts, and I just really enjoyed that part of the novel, even though there are points where it's obviously informational and it kind of drags out. I really just appreciated how it was written, and I really enjoyed this book.
Yeah, I agree with Alex because honestly I thought I wouldn't like this book, but then I started reading more into it and I actually liked it, and I liked all the like Alex said, the plan, how they went into very detail about how they planned to capture him, when in time, everything. And I really liked this book. I would recommend it to anyone, literally.
On my part, I thought it was shocking because I had never heard of Adolf Eichmann, and he was such a big part of the book and of the Holocaust in general. I always associated it with just Hitler as the main mastermind, but then when you read the book and you find out everything Adolf Eichmann actually was a part of and how he actually helped kill most of the Jews in the concentration camps, and he was he set the plan in motion for most of the gatherings and taking them to the concentration camps, and it was so sinister because he wanted to be their he was faking to be their friend, oh, you'll be fine, you're just going to go get help, and then they'd be exterminated.
Exactly. And I remember at one a bunch of parts in the book where they, especially after they had captured them or captured him, and they were that group of attendants on the plane that didn't know that they were part of the secret mission or what the point of it was. Once they figured it out, everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew who Adolf Eichmann was. All of the Israeli people recognized his name, but it's been so covered up. And especially in Americans learning about the history, we just learn about the military side of it and how Hitler caused all of it. We don't see who's actually on the ground doing all this stuff.
Yes, we also look at it from the U.S. point of view, how the U.S. entered the war and not how everyone else
and what the consequences
was.
Were.
Yeah. We don't get to see what happens after because we didn't have war on this side.
Right.
It was all in Europe. And so they have more information, I guess, firsthand experiences with kind of what happens after and the aftermath, and just now, how it is portrayed now, we're not as sensitive to it because it didn't really happen to us.
Right.
But I guess if you tell a European Jew, I think they would take it more harshly than a Jew in America.
Yeah. But anyways, continuing, I think another reason that I really liked this book was the writing style. I really liked the way that even though it was informational and like its purpose was to educate and inform and almost, like say, please don't do this again, basically, and show how hard it was to capture him. I like how it was written like a novel, like it was like a chapter book. Like there was the third person omniscient where you could see inside of these special agents and survivors. Like you could see what they were thinking as well as what they were doing. And even I was shocked and kind of fascinated by what Adolf Eichmann was thinking, because he gave that, Bascom like gave that at some points where, especially in the beginning of the book, there was a line about him saying that he was grossed out by what he was doing to the Jews, even though he was just answering orders. I thought that was fascinating how they were able to, even though it's textbook information that he's giving us in this book, he's writing it like it's like a fiction novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree, but I think he was trying to show more sides to Eichmann, because he, at the end of the war, he also wrote that Eichmann was like happy to, like, if he had to die right now, he was happy that he had killed all those 5 million Jews, and he was saying that to his army. And so I think he's a very dynamic character in the book, because you see like all parts from him, like when he was in the military, when he was actually a part of the Holocaust, after when he escaped, like kind of his life afterwards, and kind of how his kids like had the same ideals.
Right.
So his kids were like joining like Argentinian like anti-Semitic like groups, and so they had the same like notion of like hatred for the Jews, which I think he was a very big part of, because like as a kid you're very impressionable.
Yeah.
And so if he like spewed hate towards the Jews, I think his kids would have picked up on that.
And they definitely did.
Yeah.
So the plan also was very like complex.
Yeah, the way that it was drawn out for so long, and then they kept delaying it because there was a problem, or delaying it because they wanted to be sure. There were so many people involved, and one thing that I like about the book as well is at the beginning they give you a list of participants. So there are so many names and so much information to take in that it would be almost impossible to remember everything and all the people involved if you didn't have this basically character list of everyone that helped and contributed to the capture of Eichmann, and the way that everything was planned down to the exact minute of when they had to be somewhere, and the pros and cons of buying a safe house and transportation and the disguises and wigs and forging license plates. Like everything was just so intricate, and if they messed up one thing, everything could have gone wrong. So and then the fact that they were going to capture him on May 10th, and then they were like, okay, May 11th, and then something's wrong with the airplane, and now we have to wait like 2 more weeks. Like it was just so, like it was just this huge buildup, and then it was so satisfying when they finally got to that scene where they were able to capture him right outside of his tiny home in Argentina. So that was definitely one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, I also like at the beginning, like you said, like at the beginning of the book, they gave us like the list of the characters, and like it helps me mostly just to remember. Like I can go back and like look at the description so I can know who are they talking about, because sometimes some of the characters just go and pop in, like yeah, and I'm just like, oh my god, I literally forgot about this person. So I went back to like the beginning of the book and saw. And also about the plan, like Alex said, like if something went wrong, like it would mess up like the whole plan. So they really had to be like discreet about it, and just like literally how they delayed the plan for so long until that day that they captured him. I thought it was like really interesting. That's like the part of the book that I really mostly enjoyed, because I just like to see like how they went throughout the plan and stuff like that. And yeah.
I also think like not one person like played like a role too small. Like each one was a part of the plan in like a very important like section of the plan, and if they weren't involved in it, it wouldn't have gone as smoothly as it actually did.
Yeah.
But I think everyone played like a really strong point of the book, and it was like essential to the capture.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move on, and here's a message from our sponsor. Audible has the largest selection of audiobooks and original audio performances anywhere. Get started today with a 20% off discount with code LITERARY. And now back to the book.
So we've been giving it like glowing reviews and talking about everything we like. Let's talk about some of the things that made it kind of less effective. The main thing for me was the timeline, and I don't know if that was just like my fault, like I wasn't reading carefully enough, and maybe if I went back I would understand, but the timeline around chapter 6 kind of started to get confusing, and I think partly that's not really the author's fault. There's just so much information that it's hard to put it in this like novel-like book that I think was intended for people our age, but yeah, that's one of the things that I didn't really love.
The part where I started getting confused was how his family got to Argentina.
Yeah.
Because they never really explained that at first. And then they were, like, young, and people had gone in and, like, talked to them and, like, were friends with his wife.
Right.
And then they just disappeared. But I was confused because if they were actually, like, surveilling them, then they would have known they had left.
Yeah.
And they just, like, appeared out of nowhere. And then in later, like, chapters, it was explained. But the timeline of it all was just really weird.
Yeah, like I had to, it wasn't one of those chapters where you could just kind of skim it and know what was going on. You had to really like focus on, if they gave you a year or a date, you had to really like pay attention to where it fit.
Yeah, like the timeline also was a struggle for me because I'm really like a distracted reader. So once I don't get something, like I'm confused on like a part, I have to go back and reread some of the parts so I can understand like, oh, this is where we're at, like, and it just really like confused and like messed up my brain at some points of the book.
I was really interested in, after Eichmann was captured, how he gave up so easily. Like, they only held him for like 2 days, and he had already agreed to like go to trial and basically go to jail.
Yeah, he resisted when they first captured him. What was the man's name? Let me look at my participants list. The investigator,
Malkin.
Yeah, that was the guy who got him, but who interrogated him?
It was Malkin.
Aroni? Yeah. Anyways. So he was like trying to break him down, and Eichmann, living in Argentina, had like 3 fake names. He was like Ricardo Clement and like all these other names. And so the main goal of the interrogation was to get him to confess his identity, and he was easily broken down, and I think a reason for that was because, well, he was so disoriented. He was captured at night off the sidewalk of his house, and then, you know, he couldn't see because they put blackout goggles on him, and then as soon as they got him to the safe house, they handcuffed him to the bed. So if you feel that vulnerable and that out of control, I feel like you would be pretty compliant because you wouldn't know like who has you, what's going on, whether or not they're going to kill you. Like you have no clue. So I feel like that's a reason. And then also Malkin, who like got him to sign the thing, gave him like 2 glasses of wine, so he's probably a little tipsy, maybe not a lot, but just a little bit, enough for him to just understand that what was happening was inevitable, I guess.
I agree with like all of it, and basically more towards the last part. I think he just realized like he had escaped long enough. Like
give up.
It was inevitable. I can't speak today. But he like signed it willingly, and he said he wanted to tell the real story as to why he was part of the Nazis, and kind of show a true picture of himself, even though it was kind of sinister-like to me personally, because he had so many different parts. Like, you saw him at his most vulnerable, and then, like, when he was doing these, like, horrendous things.
I feel like he still lied to himself, even after he had, like, given his identity and signed the thing. He was still resisting the fact, like, he was trying to justify himself still, and I think he was trying to justify himself to the agents while also, like, to himself, like, lying to himself that he had no guilty conscience about it.
I also really liked how the book in the epilogue showed his trial a bit.
Yeah.
Because I think that, like, ties it all together, kind of how it started and then how it ended. And another recommendation, I think there's a book out there about Joseph Mengele, who was the notorious Nazi doctor who would do, like, experiments on twins, and, like, he would connect them. And he was also a very big part of the extermination camps. He would decide who would get exterminated and who would survive and go on to work and ultimately maybe die as well. And he escaped and never got captured.
He never
no one went after him. They couldn't really find him. So I think that's, like, a really good thing to look into.
And real quick before we end, in the trial, I say favorite lightly because it's not good, but it was, like, a satisfying part was in the trial they read out his charges against him. It lasted an hour, which was absolutely insane, that he was standing there listening to the things he had done and why he was being charged to this degree of murder and this degree of murder for an hour, which just shows, 6 million lives and absolutely ridiculous amount of charges that he was put up against.
Well, this is the end of our discussion. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week.